The moment you truly defeat a narcissist is not when you scream, expose them, or win an argument. It's when they look at you and realize you feel nothing. No fear, no hope, no pull. That's the moment their world cracks. Because when a narcissist knows they have permanently lost access to you, they don't move on peacefully. They unravel. And today, I'm going to show you the 4 signs that prove you didn't just escape, you won. If this is resonating and you're starting to see patterns you couldn't name before, pause for a second and ground yourself. You're not imagining this. And if you want clarity instead of confusion, stay with me. When a narcissist realizes they have truly been defeated, one of the first things that surfaces is sudden and dramatic emotional extremes, and this happens because their emotional regulation has collapsed. Narcissists rely on external validation to stabilize their inner world. They do not generate a steady sense of self from within, so they use other people's reactions to feel real, powerful, and intact. When you disengage emotionally, when you stop reacting with anger, fear, or pleading, you remove the primary mechanism they use to manage their internal chaos. This creates a psychological free fall. On the surface, you may see exaggerated happiness, forced confidence, or displays of success that feel performative rather than authentic. This false high is an attempt to convince themselves and others that they are unaffected, superior, and winning. It is not joy, it is compensation. At the same time, underneath that manufactured positivity, bitterness, and resentment begin to leak out. You may notice sharp irritability, passive aggression, or moments where the mask slips and hostility becomes visible. These emotional swings are not random. They reflect a nervous system that is dysregulated and desperate for stabilization. Without your emotional engagement, the narcissist cannot soothe themselves, so they oscillate between grandiosity and rage. The high moments are an attempt to escape shame, while the low moments are the shame itself breaking through. This is why their behavior can seem confusing or contradictory, thriving one moment and furious the next. The extremes intensify because indifference is intolerable to them. Anger still proves you care. Sadness still feeds their importance, but calm detachment leaves them without feedback. This absence creates panic, which they manage by amplifying emotions rather than processing them. The more consistent and grounded you remain, the more extreme their internal experience becomes, because your stability highlights their lack of it. What looks like emotional volatility is actually exposure. You are no longer absorbing their emotional overflow, so it spills outward instead. This is not healing, growth, or transformation. It is a system failing under the weight of its own dependency, revealing how deeply they relied on you to regulate what they were never able to regulate themselves. When a narcissist has truly lost, they begin to obsessively rewrite the history of the relationship, not because they want truth, but because they need psychological survival. Their sense of self is built on the belief that they are superior, justified, and in control. When you leave emotionally and no longer participate in their version of reality, that belief is threatened. They cannot sit with the idea that they were rejected, exposed, or made irrelevant. So the past must be edited to protect their ego. This rewriting often looks like minimizing the relationship, suddenly claiming it was never that serious, or reframing you as unstable, needy, or the problem all along. What once mattered deeply is now dismissed as insignificant. This is not indifference. It is panic disguised as dismissal. By shrinking the meaning of the relationship, they shrink the impact of losing it. Another version of this rewriting appears when they insist they were the one who ended things, even when the facts clearly say otherwise. Control over the narrative becomes more important than reality itself. If they can convince themselves and others that they walked away, then they do not have to face the humiliation of being left. This behavior also serves a social function. By spreading a distorted story, they attempt to secure validation and sympathy from others, using external agreement to reinforce their altered reality. The more permanently you are gone, the more rigid this story becomes, because there is no longer any opportunity to correct it. Any challenge to their rewritten past feels like an attack on their identity. This is why they react with defensiveness or hostility when confronted with facts. Truth threatens collapse. The rewriting may also include sudden claims of self-awareness, such as admitting small flaws while blaming you for everything that truly went wrong. This creates the illusion of accountability without real responsibility. It allows them to appear reasonable while still protecting their core self-image. Ultimately, this constant revision of history reveals the depth of their defeat. A healthy person can grieve, reflect, and integrate loss. A narcissist cannot. They must erase, distort, and control the past because sitting with reality would force them to feel shame they are not equipped to process. When a narcissist has been defeated for real, they often engage in provocation without purpose, a pattern of behavior that seems random, confusing, and unnecessary on the surface, but is psychologically loaded underneath. These provocations can take many forms: sudden messages that say nothing meaningful, indirect social media posts clearly designed to be seen by you, exaggerated displays of happiness, or subtle attempts to spark jealousy, guilt, or self-doubt. What makes this behavior distinct is that it lacks a clear goal, such as reconciliation, resolution, or even open conflict. Instead, it is driven by desperation for emotional feedback. Narcissists rely on other people's nervous systems to confirm their own existence. When you emotionally disengage, they lose the feedback loop that tells them they still matter, still affect you, still have impact. Provocation becomes a way to test whether they are truly irrelevant. Any reaction, even negative, temporarily restores their sense of power. Silence, however, is intolerable because it offers no reflection. This is why the provocations often escalate in intensity or become increasingly bizarre. They are not trying to communicate. They are trying to feel. The lack of purpose reflects internal disorganization. Without access to you, they cannot regulate their emotions or stabilize their identity, so they reach outward impulsively. This behavior may also appear contradictory, alternating between hostility and friendliness, or between indirect insults and performative concern. These shifts are not strategy, but dysregulation. The narcissist is throwing emotional signals into the void, hoping something lands. When nothing does, frustration and panic grow. The more grounded and unresponsive you remain, the more exposed this pattern becomes. What once felt calculated now feels clumsy and transparent. Provocation without purpose is a sign that they are no longer in control of the dynamic. They are reacting rather than directing, seeking proof that they still occupy space in your emotional world. The absence of response forces them to confront a terrifying reality they work tirelessly to avoid: that their influence has ended, that they no longer matter in the way they once did, that their presence no longer shapes your inner life, and that loss is something they cannot manipulate. explain away, or undo. When a narcissist has been defeated at the deepest level, they often adopt a posture of forced superiority, presenting themselves as healed, enlightened, morally elevated, or suddenly transformed. This shift can look convincing at first. They may speak the language of growth, self-awareness, spirituality, or emotional maturity, especially in public spaces where image matters most. But this is not genuine evolution. It is a defensive reconstruction of identity designed to survive the shame of being rendered irrelevant. Narcissists cannot tolerate the idea that you outgrew them, detached from them, or no longer need them to define your reality. To cope with that injury, they must place themselves above you in some way. Superiority becomes a psychological lifeboat. By framing themselves as wiser, calmer, or more evolved, they avoid confronting the painful truth that you left because the dynamic was damaging. This performance often appears right after they realize there is no path back to emotional access. The timing is not accidental. Forced superiority allows them to convert loss into imagined victory. It also protects them from self-reflection. If they are now above it all, then nothing needs to be examined, repaired, or owned. This stance may include subtle contempt, spiritual bypassing, or patronizing language that reframes your boundaries as immaturity and their detachment as transcendence. What they are actually doing is dissociating from humiliation. The mask is rebuilt with more polish because the old one failed. This behavior is also meant to be witnessed. They want others to see them as thriving, centered, and unbothered because external validation is still required to stabilize their self-image. Without an audience, the superiority collapses. Inside, there is no peace, only rigidity. Real growth softens a person. Forced superiority hardens them. It eliminates vulnerability, curiosity, and accountability, replacing them with certainty and distance. The more exaggerated this performance becomes, the clearer the defeat actually is. Healthy people do not need to announce their healing or prove their elevation. They live it quietly. When a narcissist performs superiority, it is not a sign of closure. It is evidence that your absence created a wound they could not integrate, so they built a pedestal to stand on instead. When a narcissist realizes they have been defeated for real and can no longer access you directly, a smear campaign often intensifies. And this is one of the clearest indicators that their control has fully collapsed. Narcissists depend heavily on external validation to regulate their self-image. And when you remove yourself, they lose not only supply, but also the ability to define themselves through you. The smear campaign is an attempt to regain that regulation indirectly by distorting your character to others. They try to restore their sense of superiority and innocence while offloading shame onto you. This behavior is not about justice or truth. It is about image preservation. When they can no longer provoke you, influence you, or pull you back into the dynamic, they shift their focus to controlling how others perceive the story. You may be labeled as toxic, unstable, abusive, or ungrateful, often using fragments of reality taken out of context. These narratives are designed to confuse and isolate, but more importantly, they are designed to reassure the narcissist that they are still powerful. If others believe them, they feel temporarily soothed. The intensity of the smear often correlates with the permanence of your absence. The more final your disengagement is, the more aggressive the character assassination becomes. This happens because they are no longer managing a relationship. They are managing an injury. The smear campaign also serves as a preemptive defense. By discrediting you first, they attempt to neutralize anything you might say or represent, even if you are saying nothing at all. Silence is especially threatening because it leaves room for truth to emerge organically. The narcissist fills that silence with noise. This behavior can feel deeply violating, but psychologically, it reveals desperation rather than dominance. A secure person does not need to destroy someone else's reputation to survive a separation. The smear campaign is evidence that they are still emotionally entangled, still dysregulated, and still dependent on external agreement to maintain their identity. While it may look like retaliation, it is actually exposure, showing how much power your absence still holds over a system that cannot function without control. When a narcissist realizes you are permanently gone, one of the more confusing reactions you may observe is a sudden display of self-awareness or exaggerated victimhood, and this shift is rarely genuine. It can sound like accountability at first. They may admit to being flawed, emotionally wounded, or misunderstood, and they may even reference therapy, trauma, or personal growth. But this is not true introspection. It is a strategic emotional repositioning designed to restore supply and control without appearing overtly aggressive. Narcissists are highly attuned to what earns sympathy and moral advantage. When dominance fails, vulnerability becomes the new mask. By presenting themselves as the injured party, they invert the power dynamic and attempt to pull empathy out of others, including you. This performance allows them to avoid real responsibility while appearing evolved. The admissions are selective and shallow. They acknowledge just enough imperfection to seem self-aware, but never enough to require real change, repair, or sustained accountability. Often the narrative subtly shifts blame back onto you. Their pain is emphasized, while the harm they caused is reframed as accidental, mutual, or provoked. This keeps their core self-image intact while repositioning you as either cruel for leaving or incapable of understanding their suffering. Victimhood also functions as a way to re-enter your emotional field without direct confrontation. If anger no longer works, pity becomes the tool. This is why these displays often emerge after silence or no contact has held firm. They are not reaching for healing. They are reaching for regulation. The performance may also be public, aimed at mutual connections or social spaces, because external validation is still required to stabilize their identity. Being seen as wounded but noble is far safer than being seen as rejected or abandoned. What distinguishes performative self-awareness from real growth is consistency and humility. Real growth is quiet, sustained, and uncomfortable. Performative awareness is dramatic, self-focused, and fleeting. It disappears the moment it no longer generates attention or emotional response. This behavior signals not transformation, but adaptation, showing that while the tactic has changed, the underlying need for control, validation, and emotional leverage remains firmly in place. When a narcissist realizes that your healing is real and irreversible, it threatens them far more deeply than any visible success ever could. Success can be dismissed, mocked, or competed with. Healing cannot. Healing means you are no longer organized around them emotionally, psychologically, or energetically. It means their approval, rejection, admiration, or contempt no longer determines your inner state. For a narcissist, this represents a catastrophic loss of relevance. Their power was never about love or connection. It was about being central to your emotional world. When you heal, that center disappears. You are no longer reactive, explainable, or predictable to them. Your calm exposes the dysfunction they depended on you to carry. This is why they often react more intensely to your peace than to your achievements. Achievements still operate within comparison. Healing removes comparison entirely. It places you outside the game. As you become more grounded, regulated, and self-directed, the narcissist experiences an internal mirror they cannot escape. Your stability highlights their instability. Your boundaries expose their entitlement. Your lack of interest reveals how much they were feeding off your engagement. This can trigger subtle hostility, contempt, or attempts to diminish your growth. They may frame your healing as coldness, arrogance, or avoidance because acknowledging it as strength would require acknowledging their role in what damaged you. In some cases, they attempt to reinsert chaos into your life, not because they miss you, but because your clarity threatens their psychological defenses. Your healing confirms that the problem was never your inadequacy, but the dynamic itself. That realization is intolerable for someone who survives by externalizing blame. It also means they can no longer use you as proof of their desirability, importance, or dominance. When you stop orbiting them emotionally, they lose a reference point for their identity. This is why they may escalate behaviors when they see you thriving internally, even if your life looks quiet on the outside. Healing is silent power. It doesn't announce itself, doesn't perform, and doesn't seek validation. And because it cannot be controlled, competed with, or taken away, it represents a permanent defeat they cannot reverse or rewrite. When a narcissist realizes that your absence is final and irreversible, they often experience a deep internal collapse that they do everything possible to conceal, because permanence is something they cannot psychologically tolerate. As long as there is a chance of return, reaction, or re-engagement, they can maintain the illusion of control. Finality removes that illusion completely. This realization does not register as normal loss or grief. It registers as annihilation of influence. Narcissists are structured around access to attention, emotion, reaction, and validation. When access is permanently cut off, the system they built their identity on begins to malfunction. You may notice increased rigidity, compulsive behaviors, impulsive decisions, or frantic attempts to reinvent themselves. These are not signs of freedom or moving on. They are signs of internal disorientation. Without you as a reference point, they struggle to anchor who they are. This can lead to reckless choices, sudden life changes, or dramatic identity shifts that seem disconnected from reality. They may attach themselves quickly to new people, ideologies, or roles, not out of genuine interest, but out of urgency. Something must replace the stabilizing function you once served. At the same time, there is often an unspoken fixation on you. Even if they never reach out, your absence becomes a psychological echo. They replay scenarios, imagine conversations, and construct internal narratives where they are either vindicated or superior, because the real ending offers no emotional resolution they can tolerate. Closure requires integration. Integration requires humility. Neither is available to them. This internal collapse is rarely visible as sadness. It appears instead as agitation, defensiveness, or exaggerated self-assurance. The louder the performance, the deeper the disorganization underneath. What makes this stage definitive is that nothing they do restores equilibrium. New supply feels hollow. Validation fades quickly. Distraction stops working. Your absence created a gap that cannot be filled because it wasn't about you as a person, it was about you as a regulator of their internal state. Once that function is gone, the system never fully recalibrates. This is why true no contact changes them permanently, not into better people, but into more fractured versions of themselves. They survive, but they do not resolve. And that unresolved fracture is the quiet proof that the defeat was real and irreversible.